Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting the Port Authority to speak here. And so today I'd like to talk a little bit about the New York, New Jersey Rail Cross Harbor Rail program. Some of you may not be familiar with this. And here is just one picture of our car float transiting between New Jersey and New York. And it does carry rail cars as we move them back and forth. Next slide. So for today's presentation, I'd just like to give a little introduction on the system, briefly talk a little bit about car float history in New York Harbor, discuss the existing railroad situation in the area, and then talk about the facilities and operations, and then the commodities and volumes of goods that we move across the harbor. So on this slide here, oh, sorry, I didn't go back. So on this slide here, this just sort of shows the network that we have. And on the left, we obviously have New Jersey, on the right, New York. And the rail lines here is the southeast corner of Jersey City, Greenville Yard. Conrail comes across from the Oak Island Yard. They bring in the cars to Greenville. We move them onto the rail car floats, float them over to 65th Street in Brooklyn. And we do also travel up First Avenue in Brooklyn. So we do have a street track operation there also. And at 65th Street, we hand them off to New York and Atlantic, where they deliver the cars to to either New York City or the Long Island area. 65th Street is next to sort of the Brooklyn Army Terminal, if you know the area, and down in Sunset Park. And this is the last car float operating in New York Harbor today. So next slide. So even though it's the last, this has been a very interesting history of car floats. And even into the mid 20th century, car floats were very, very active across the Hudson River and New York Harbor. On the left here is just a 1946 timetable of the New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad and one of the car float situations they had there with the schedules. You can see the frequency, their schedules, they ran continuously. And on the right is from a 1964 transportation study looking between New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, covering a whole bunch of transportation issues and discussing sort of the consolidation of the railroads and the car float operation that existed. Manhattan's sort of in the middle of the map there. And, all of the railroads before they consolidated, before Conrail, all of them, finished in New Jersey, and then they moved over the goods via the car floats into Manhattan and Brooklyn. And so there was a very active and working waterfront operation. And, hundreds of these transited the harbor and then the river on a daily basis. And, obviously with the trucking and bridges and everything else, severely impacted the railroads. And so this is the last car float. Port Authority acquired it in 2008. Next slide. So this is sort of the current situation with railroads. Coming into the New York metropolitan area, the two Class 1 railroads are Norfolk Southern and CSX. CSX generally operates more in the Northeast. Norfolk Southern generally operates more in the Southeast. And when they come into this area, they bring the trains, and Conrail takes over. When they were creating the different railroads, no one could figure out exactly how to clearly delineate the benefits in the New York area. And so Conrail is owned 50-50 by CSX and Norfolk Southern, but it is sort of its own operating entity. And they're the ones that we interact with as part of New York, New Jersey Rail. CSX does go up the Hudson River, and there is a rail bridge outside of Albany at Selkirk. That is the first rail bridge as you travel north of the Hudson, about 160 miles. So the service that we provide is sort of a marine bridge between Jersey City and Brooklyn. And, without it, you have to go 320 miles round trip out of your way. Norfolk Southern does not really have access up there easily anyways. And so we do predominantly move Norfolk Southern goods back and forth, and less so with CSX. And when they do get to the Brooklyn side, they New York and Atlantic operates across the Long Island Railroad network, and west of Jamaica, it's all a freight network for NYA. They bring the goods up to Fresh Pond, and then they distribute them. And so CSX, again, does have access on the east side of the Hudson where Norfolk Southern doesn't. So that makes a big difference. And sorry, next slide. And so again, these are sort of the facilities in our operation. Greenville Yard in New Jersey, Brooklyn 65th Street, the street track in Brooklyn. There is another yard at 51st Street, sort of paralleling First Avenue. There used to be a second car float operation that operated there, and there was another rail bridge there. That was all changed after Superstorm Sandy, when the Greenville operation and the bridges there were completely wiped out. And the 51st Street one was sort of the only one that survived and had to be moved over to Greenville so that things could continue to flow back and forth. Also in New Jersey there, just south of the Greenville Yard, there are a bunch of warehouses. The Port Jersey Rail serves those warehouses. It's still owned by New York, New Jersey Rail, but it's a slightly different operation in the sense that there's no, movement of goods sort of back and forth, but it provides just regular railroad switching operations. Next slide. So this is Greenville Yard currently. Port Authority and federal dollars have invested almost $100 million into the yard. And what you see on the right, there's what we call Bridge 10 to modernize and produce, a really state-of-the-art facility for existing freight domestic railroad service. And the Bridge 10 on the right is, by itself is about a $40 million bridge. It's a pneumatic bridge. And this is very important. We'll talk about a little bit later in that tides. And this bridge helps to minimize any impacts because it does move up and down, and it is very sturdy. And so that helps us to keep operations going even when tides are not ideal. Next slide. Here is Brooklyn 65th Street. These are the existing railroad transfer bridges that are there, along with the existing yard. New York, New Jersey Rail is really just a bridge route. Our operations stop basically where the bridges in the background are, and then that becomes New York and Atlantic territory. So we move the cars over there, we sort them out, and then New York and Atlantic picks those cars up and then distributes them, moves them out into New York City and Long Island. It's helpful that we have the Bay Ridge branch. It's an exclusive freight operation, and there's no passenger service at this time on there. If some of you are familiar with this, New York City and New York City Transit looking at the IBX operation. So we are talking with them about how, that could possibly coexist with freight operations. Obviously, that's a future scenario, so nothing's going to impact us immediately on this. And, we continue to work and build out 65th Street and try to improve the freighter operations out there. Next slide. And so one of the things that we've done at 65th Street is we've recently completed about a $5 million project. Again, federal grants were involved through MARAD to improve the transload tracks and operations there. And so the transloading is where, we would move rail cars across the harbor, but rather than be distributed to a warehouse or a private entity in a siding, the rail car sits there, and then the private company sort of brings in their trucks and moves the goods out from the yard and distributes them wherever they're going to go. And right now, we generally just deal with food and lumber for the transload operations. We're rehabilitating over 3,000 linear feet of rail and really trying to rebuild this so that it does become, again, sort of state of the art, much more reliable operation and gives us room to expand and grow. Next slide. And then here's just a little view of the Port Jersey warehouses. Um, Again, sort of part of the operation, not necessarily part of the car floats, but really important and integral to the operation. And these are all, domestic freight. Uh, Goods that come off of the ships that come into the port of New York, New Jersey, those goods are not going to either the warehouses here or being flowed across to New York City. The goods that come off of the ships, the cargo there, generally they're going to logistic warehouses, either further west in New Jersey, possibly over to Pennsylvania, where those goods are broken down and then distributed generally via truck. If they do go out by rail, then they're generally going to farther distances, either the central part of the U.S. or further west, where the longer transportation makes more sense from an economic perspective. So these are goods that are coming that we serve, that are coming from like the West Coast. I'll talk a little bit about more of the commodities, but this is basically, just your regular freight train that you see traveling across the U.S. anywhere. Next slide. And so some of the operating challenges that we have here, you can see on the left, is weather. Fog, winds, tide. These things can play a significant role and wreak havoc with some of our schedules. Fortunately, thunderstorms generally don't seem to affect us as much as they tend to be in the later afternoon. But fog is certainly, and wind, any of the storms from the high winds definitely prevent us from moving the goods back and forth. Tides, predictable, but they do create some problems, especially if we have to move cars that are longer or not your standard dimensions. And then along First Avenue, I mentioned, we do have street track where, as you can see, these tracks are right in the middle of First Avenue. And one of the problems that we have is particularly overnight, a lot of the trucks, they just park in First Avenue. They think the tracks are abandoned when they're not. And, when we start moving something at 6 a.m., we unfortunately find out that there's a truck in the way. And, it becomes a real problem getting the police to ticket them or tow them and to continue the operations for that day. Okay, next slide. So the things that New York Jersey Rail moves mostly are recyclables. So these are, glass, cullet, plastic pellets, scrap metal, forest products of lumber. Beer is a huge commodity. Food products, flour, typical building materials, cement, drywall, etc. We do a lot with the railroads also. So for Long Island Railroad, it could be the steel rails and the ties that we bring into them. New York City Subway, we do move out some of their old cars when they're purchasing the new ones, and those get scrapped. And so right now we do have an operation where, as they're releasing them, we just float them over to Greenville, and they're being dismantled at Sims. So that's a great win-win for everybody to keep the trucks off the highways and to move things back and forth. Next slide. And so we have 2 car floats. Each car float can handle approximately 18 rail cars of standard size. And the rule of thumb is about 4 trucks per every rail car. So you can see that, one car float can take 72 trucks off the road. And that's one of the primary purposes that, the Port Authority was thinking about when they purchased this, was how to minimize truck traffic, keep them off the bridges and the roadways, and really encourage an alternative transportation for the region. Next slide. So currently, New York, New Jersey Rail is moving about 5,000 carloads. There was a lot of progress in the late teens there in growing the business. When COVID hit, it definitely impacted the operations. As you can imagine, the restaurants and retail closed, so the beer market went down. Building materials also went down. Came back a little bit in 2021, dropped down again, and we're sort of back to where we were back in about 2019. There's still challenges that are involved in retaining some of the businesses. It is a complicated move because you have to deal with a Class 1 railroad, then you have to deal with a Conrail workforce, then you have New York, New Jersey Rail, and then you have New York Atlantic. So it does mean a lot of hands touch it, so that does affect the prices. But we're still, optimistic that there is still a strong demand out there, and we're still working at it. Another thing that's affecting sort of the numbers when you look at the car floats, it just in the revenue cars. One of the industry challenges right now is they're going to larger cars. So we have typically moved like 55-foot cars, but a 60-foot cars and some that are taller create more volume and better economic opportunities for the railroads and the customers. So even though the number of cars is going down, it doesn't necessarily mean that the revenue or the profits are going down at the same time. It's just sort of a shift in how things are being moved across with freight, and it just becomes sort of a pricing mechanism to handle the changes that we're seeing out there in the industry. Okay, next slide. So thank you. That was my presentation, and hope you enjoyed it. And if you've got any questions, just let me know.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you, Kyle, Kerry, and Chris, because I'm happy to report to you from the private sector of what we've been engaged with, and we've been talking about this. If you want to go to the next slide, please. We've been working on this, and we've been talking about this since 2019. And it all started pre-COVID, where we wanted to look at how can we move our goods from the airport into Manhattan faster instead of being caught up in all the congestion of New York City and getting through the tunnels. So we started talking with our partners at EDC and working with the Port Authority, and we're just looking at some opportunities to maybe use either a high-speed ferry or a barge. A barge is a little bit slower, but when COVID hit and traffic went away, that the traffic issue kind of disappeared. But we still thought about how do we still look at an opportunity of looking to move trailers to all the points that have been mentioned earlier in this call, right? About congestion, carbon footprint, how do we look at sustainability and look at ways to move and go back in time and utilize by moving a large number of trailers into the city? And like anything today, and it's come up on the calls, if we go and we say, hey, listen, we're ready to do this, unfortunately, today, there's not a point A and a point B matchup that says, okay, you can do this. And that's what we're working on. And we're very close from a private sector saying, all right, who can we match up with? We have a very good relationship with Red Hook Terminals. We're very close to working on some things. And if you can see here, this is the picture. And this picture was in the earlier presentation too, on the RFEI, of us testing just a small number of trailers just to get the concept down to really realize how long is it going to take to load up a roll-on, roll-off barge. Our network and our system, we love our network, but everything needs to be somewhere at a certain time. So we don't really have the ability to sit on trailers and say, okay, we can stage those trailers for 8 hours, 10 hours, and then move them all together. Everything needs to be at a certain place in New York and New Jersey on the trailers that we're going to move. The good news is we were able to identify, based off of a window that we're looking to work with, that says, hey, we can fit this into our network. And if you go to the next slide, please, you'll see we can, and you'll see that the little hook there, that's Bayonne. And you've seen that in earlier slides of some of the visuals and nice map photos that I've showed. And we're building a UPS facility. Actually, we built a facility there. UPS has a facility and a presence in Bayonne. And then we would cross over to Red Hook Terminal, and that's about a 45-minute to a 1-hour movement. Some of the things we're looking at, that's come up, and we talked about this earlier, was the tide, fog, different things. But we're pretty confident we're working with the Coast Guard, working with Global Container and the cruise ships, and everybody on the traffic and the timing of our operation, that we should be pretty steady, because we can't do an operation like this. And let's say we run 256 days a year, business days a year to run this. But our network, if we come back and we say, listen, this is great, but there's going to be about 75 days out of the year you're not going to be able to run because of the tide, given the height of the pier and the barge and the ramp and the truck trailers rolling on and off. So we're doing a lot of due diligence here to make sure that we can really run this operation every day, because we can't hold up 80 to a quarter of a million packages because there's fog or something like that. So we're working through these issues. We're looking at them. I'm glad to hear that they've come up on this call. But at the end of the day, if you look at this visual, I love this visual of that 45-minute to 1 hour, which is very conservative to go about 4 miles across the river from New Jersey to New York. That picture, another map taking you all the way up 95, up the New Jersey Turnpike, over to George Washington Bridge to bring you back down into Manhattan and down to Brooklyn, and then also have your trucks roll out of Brooklyn going out to Long Island. So picture that visual of saying, okay, now you're just crossing from New Jersey to New York, getting off from Brooklyn, and then everybody's taking off from there. So obviously that reduces a lot of miles, reduces your carbon footprint, and goes a long way in everything that we're trying to do. But keep in mind is there's a time that it takes to load the barge. There's a time that it takes to offload the barge. And we're saving time by doing this, but it's not a major window. It's not like we're saying, okay, we're saving 3 hours in our network. And yes, we could, depending on traffic, because as we all know, if you go to the next slide, please. This is our site in Bayonne. This is our facility. And you see where the area that's covered with the arrows, that's our wharf side that we need to make an investment in to do the infrastructure to be able to support staging trailers and having a barge come up to there. And we're going through all that due diligence now to look at that property, look at what it would cost for us to do that, the prepping that's needed to do that, to make this a reality, because the location is ideal. I mean, we're right there on the hook. When we were first looking at doing this, we were further into the coastal line, into the port, closer to the airport. And that was about an extra 45 minutes by barge to come out of that waterway to get to where we are, in addition to another 45 minutes on the water. The exciting thing about this is not only is the location great, but this also supports the city's Blue Highway as they start to look to build out other locations across the city. We love Pier 91 over by Ports America. That's a great location. If you think of the visual of not only UPS, all the other freight companies have a strong presence there. That would be a very pivotal, very high usage area, I think, of not just UPS, other companies that would want to be looking into the same thing. We all know the chicken or the egg. We're very excited about it. We would love to have the opportunity to be the first ones. We're doing a lot of due diligence on here. This is not just something that's a feel-good story for us. We've done a lot of homework behind the scenes. We've been talking about this for 5 years, and we're still looking to get to that part where we're going to potentially move. Well, we would love to move 24 trailers, one round trip a day between Bayonne and Red Hook terminals in Brooklyn. We have a great partnership with them in Hughes Marine and working on a concept. Marriott has already provided a grant to support customizing a ramp that will support a roll-on, roll-off, which is critical to this because time is of the essence. Because, like I said, at the end of the day, the water and the distance may be shorter, but to run on the road is still cheaper and in some ways faster, depending on when traffic hits. And that is the things that we're challenged with and the things that we're looking at. But we like all the benefits that the Blue Highway offers. And we think once something happens, once one of us does this and gets things rolling, I think we can all agree on this call that this is just going to be the springboard, the spark that's going to really take us back to where we were, to Kyle's presentation earlier, back to the 40s, back to the 20s and the 50s when freight was moving a lot more active by a barge or by, a barge going through the Hudson River and East River and so on. So we know that's definitely the way to go. We just, like any business model in a private sector, we just have to make sure it makes sense from a financial aspect. And we're doing a lot of due diligence on there. That's why it's very helpful for us to see some policy support. Because if you go to the next slide, you'll see there's your, just the kind of back up here. You see my comment down here about the George Washington Bridge, Route 4, as I think that's the 6th year in a row has been rated the most congested bottleneck in the country. That comes out from a study that's there supports it. So we all know, live it, we've crossed it, and we understand that. But we look at other things, what's the impact, right? When we talk about this, right? The community impact on these counties, and that's just on the New Jersey side. New York side, we're talking about Yonkers and Astoria, and so Bronx and Astoria, those other areas. The reduction in road miles, NOx, CO2 emissions, like Chris and Kerry mentioned also about the barges, the tugs that we're looking at, or some of the companies we talked to, they're looking to want to be electric. They don't want to be diesel. Because you think, okay, a barge is going to run for an hour. It's going to run on diesel. We looked at the carbon impact that would have, saying, okay, you're going to reduce so many thousands of miles a day of fuel on a truck. But a barge still does kind of run very intense on a carbon impact. So, we know everyone's talking about, the home run is, hey, how do we get an electric tug or an electric barge that kind of helps build this out? So I'm glad to see, we're all on the same page. We want to all get there together. And the more we talk about this, we just know the more this is going to become a reality, working between the private and the public sector coming together. So these are just a couple of highlights of the areas that get impacted. But if you want to go to the next slide, please, you're going to see where in Virginia, I don't know if everybody's aware of this, but in Virginia, they created a model that says, hey, we want to take trucks off of I-64 down at the port and move them. And here are just some of the highlights of how impactful the benefits of that program has been for Virginia. So we've proposed to New York and New Jersey, hey, let's look at some ways that we can kind of mirror or get some support from a policy standpoint through a tax incentive or something that can help reduce this and support to want to keep moving forward to incentivize other companies to want to kind of do the same thing here. Because we all want to do the right thing. We know it's the wave of the future. And I love saying it's the wave of the future is by going back in time. And I think that's a very exciting thing for us. It'll be a great program. At the end of the day, though, the takeaways for us is we need to make sure for our network of what we're moving, when you think about healthcare packages and all the packages in our network, they're all time stamped. We have to make sure that we really are confident that we can go in and say we can run this operation 5 days a week. Who knows, maybe down the road, even run it 7 days a week all year round and not really have to worry about any issues from a weather standpoint. The barge that we're looking and the company that we're working with, as they're going to have the modification to make sure that the trailers are tied down. They have guardrails. The only thing that's been kind of coming up that could be a monkey wrench into anything is fog. And I know it was mentioned earlier on the call. And I still think I'm hoping at the time that we run at night that fog won't be an issue. But then again, there's always potential for anything to happen when we know there's an accident on a highway or there's, a bridge gets closed or a tunnel. We know that this Blue Highway is just only going to strengthen the Northeast supply chain corridor when you think about it as an option to be able to run a network over here as more and more issues become to pop up between the bridges, the tunnels, and the roads. This is going to be a very good thing that's going to strengthen the supply chain here in New York and New Jersey. So a lot more to come on that for us. We're very excited. We're going through some phases where we're hoping to run another test on a larger scale to pilot it. We feel we're very confident we have the right partners. We've been working together hand in hand, and with the support of everybody who's on this call, I think we definitely have a bright future ahead with wanting to get this to go and started. So.